On my son's birthday, he said that the best gift for him would be for me to disappear from his life. So I smiled and left. 1 hour later, the police arrested my son. The morning sky over Maplewood, Michigan, was a dull shade of gray, thick clouds hanging low as if they, too, carried the weight of the day. Inside a modest, two-story home on Briar Lane, Claire Miller moved quietly through the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she flipped blueberry pancakes onto a chipped porcelain plate. She had tied a blue ribbon around her ponytail, hoping it might make Dean smile, even if just a little. She had hung 3 blue balloons by the window and placed a gift-wrapped box at the edge of the kitchen table. 17 years. She remembered his birth as if it were yesterday, how small he had been, how tightly he had gripped her finger. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled her from her thoughts. Dean emerged slowly, shoulders hunched, dark hoodie pulled over his head. He didn't look at her. He never did anymore. Claire smiled, hesitant but genuine. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, placing the plate in front of him. "Blueberry pancakes. Your favorite." Dean sat down, eyes fixed on his phone. "You didn't have to do all this." Claire's smile faltered. "I wanted to. 17 is a big deal." He tapped his phone a few more times before finally setting it down. When he did look at her, it wasn't with affection, it was with something colder. Harder. "If you really want to give me something," he said, voice low, "you could disappear from my life." The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "What did you say?" Dean leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I'm serious. Just leave. Stop pretending like we're some happy little family. You've made things worse every year since Dad died." Claire's breath caught. For a second, she stood frozen. She had rehearsed countless scenarios in her mind about what today might bring. Anger. Distance. Maybe even a tear. But not this. She nodded slowly, pushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Okay," she said softly. Dean scoffed. "You're not actually going to leave." But she didn't respond. Instead, she walked back to the sink, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and turned off the stove. She glanced once more at the gift she had wrapped the night before. Inside, a vintage vinyl record of Dean's favorite band, something she had spent weeks tracking down. Without another word, she grabbed her purse from the counter, slipped on her shoes, and stepped outside. The air was brisk, the scent of wet leaves rising from the pavement. She paused on the porch, listening for any sign that he might call her back. A simple, "Wait." A muttered apology. But there was nothing. Just the faint hum of traffic in the distance and the weight of her son's words echoing in her mind. "If you really want to give me something, disappear." Claire took a deep breath and started walking. Inside, Dean watched her go through the kitchen window. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. But then he picked up his phone and opened his group chat. "Dean, party at my place. No parents. Come through." He turned on the speaker in the living room and blasted music loud enough to drown out the silence. As the bass thumped and the house filled with noise, he ignored the strange knot forming in his chest. He told himself she'd be back by noon. Maybe she needed to cool off. Maybe she just wanted him to feel guilty. It was classic Claire. But as 10 minutes passed, then 20, and she didn't text, didn't call, a shadow of doubt began to stretch across the edges of his mind. In the back of the house, a single blue balloon detached from the window and drifted slowly to the floor. He told himself not to care. But something about the quiet, beneath the music, beneath the bravado, felt wrong. And somewhere deep down, he knew, this birthday wouldn't be like any other. The music roared through the Miller house like a defiant heartbeat, pounding against the walls and echoing through empty hallways. Dean lounged on the living room couch, a soda can balanced on his stomach, his gaze fixed on the television, though he wasn't watching anything. Every few minutes, he checked his phone. Still no message from Claire. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but something gnawed at him. It wasn't just that she had left. It was how easily she had done it. No guilt trip. No lecture. No tears. She had simply walked out. That wasn't her. Claire Miller, the queen of overreaction, hadn't even raised her voice. It felt wrong. Off script. Like he had been reading a play for years, only to find the main character suddenly improvising. By mid-morning, two of his friends arrived, Eli and Jace, both 17, both carrying six-packs of soda and bags of chips like offerings to a restless god. Dean opened the door with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Happy birthday, bro," Jace said, slapping his shoulder as they entered. "Place to ourselves?" Eli asked, glancing around. "No, Claire?" "She took off," Dean muttered, kicking the door shut behind them. "Said she had something to do." Eli raised an eyebrow. "On your birthday?" Dean shrugged, trying to seem unbothered. "Whatever. More space for us." They settled in, gaming controllers in hand, snacks spilling across the coffee table. The house buzzed with noise and laughter, but underneath it all, something unspoken lingered. Dean kept glancing at the kitchen doorway, half expecting her to walk in with another guilt-soaked pancake or a passive-aggressive comment. But she never came. By 11 o'clock, the air in the house felt heavier. The music wasn't enough to keep the weird tension away. Dean stood up abruptly, stretching. "Be right back," he muttered. He climbed the stairs to his mother's bedroom, a place he rarely entered. The door creaked open slowly. Everything was still in place, bed made, pillows arranged neatly, Claire's favorite scarf draped over the chair by the vanity. But something felt sterile. Like a hotel room. As if no one lived there anymore. He checked the closet. Her coat was gone. So were her everyday shoes. The ones she wore to run errands, walk the dog they no longer had, or go to the store. He opened the top drawer of her nightstand, empty. Her purse, the big leather one she never left behind, wasn't there. Dean stood still for a moment, a sick feeling stirring in his gut. Had she really left? For good? When he returned downstairs, Jace and Eli noticed his expression shift. "Dude," Jace said, pausing the game. "You good?" Dean hesitated. "She didn't just take off for a few hours. Her stuff's gone. All of it. Maybe she went to visit someone?" Eli offered, unsure. "Like, your aunt or something?" "I don't have an aunt." They exchanged a look. Dean grabbed his phone and finally did what he had been avoiding, he called her. Straight to voicemail. He called again. Same thing. "Okay, that's weird," Jace said. "You sure she didn't say where she was going?" "She didn't say anything," Dean muttered. "I told her, never mind." He didn't want to admit what he had said. "Not yet." Eli leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You think she really just bailed? No note. No text. Just gone." Dean's voice cracked slightly, though he tried to cover it with a cough. "She's never done that before." As if on cue, the house seemed to shudder. A loud thump came from the direction of the garage. All three boys froze. It wasn't the sound of something falling, it was heavier, duller. Like something being dropped. Or slammed. Dean stood up slowly. What the hell was that? They moved cautiously through the hallway, Dean leading the way. The garage door was closed, but unlocked. He hesitated before opening it. Something in his chest told him to turn back, to let it be. But curiosity, and something darker, pushed him forward. He opened the door and stepped inside. At first, there was nothing unusual. The garage smelled of oil and old cardboard. The lawnmower sat in its corner, a rake leaned against the wall, and his mother's gardening gloves lay folded on a shelf. But something new had been added. In the far corner, partially hidden behind an old tarp, was a large suitcase. Dean felt his stomach turn. That suitcase hadn't been there yesterday. He walked toward it slowly. The closer he got, the more his breath caught. There were dark smudges on the handle. It looked like dried paint, only it wasn't. He reached out to lift the tarp when Jace's voice cut through the silence. "Dean. Don't." Dean stopped. He was shaking. He hadn't noticed until now. Eli stepped forward. "Dude, maybe we should call someone." Dean backed away from the suitcase, his hands trembling. "She packed. That's all it is. She packed and left. That's all." But none of them believed it. Back inside the house, Dean tried calling again. Still voicemail. He sent a text. "Dean, where are you?" No response. By noon, the house was quieter than ever, despite the music still humming faintly in the background. The boys stopped talking. They stopped joking. The air was thick with something none of them could name. At 12:30, Dean stood alone in the hallway, staring at the front door. She was supposed to come back. He didn't know how he knew that, but he did. And the fact that she hadn't was starting to unravel something deep inside him. He didn't see the neighbor across the street watching from behind their curtain. He didn't hear the faint sound of footsteps moving along the side of the house. He didn't notice the clock ticking louder than usual. All he could think about was the suitcase in the garage. And the silence that wouldn't go away. At 10:47 in the morning, George Hendricks sat in his favorite recliner by the bay window, sipping lukewarm coffee and flipping through the classifieds of the Maplewood Herald. Retired, widowed, and a man of routine, George had lived next to the Millers for over 20 years. He'd watched Dean grow from a squealing toddler into a brooding teenager, and Claire from a bright-eyed newlywed to a weary single mother. He didn't pry, but he noticed. He always noticed. That morning, something felt off. First, it was the balloons in the window, blue ones, trembling in the breeze like they were nervous. Then came the absence of Claire's car in the driveway. She never left before noon on Saturdays. Then there was the music, too loud, too early. And the boys. George had seen them come in, laughing and jostling each other like nothing mattered. He was about to return to his paper when the thud came. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. A jarring, heavy noise from the direction of the Miller's garage that made him set down his mug with trembling fingers. Then came another. Not quite identical. Muffled. Followed by the sound of the side gate creaking open. George leaned forward in his chair, squinting through the lace curtain. What he saw made him rise. Dean stumbled out of the garage, his hands smeared with something dark. He paused on the driveway, breathing hard, looking around like he wasn't sure where he was. Then he walked back inside. George stared at the closed door for a full minute. Something wasn't right. Dean didn't look hurt, but he didn't look okay either. That boy looked cracked. Like a mirror with just one too many fractures. George went to the phone. He hesitated, just for a second, then dialed. When the dispatcher answered, he kept it simple. He gave his name, his address, and said there was something going on at his neighbor's house that didn't sit right with him. It could be nothing, he admitted. But you might want to check it out. By 11:15, a black and white cruiser rolled quietly onto Briar Lane, lights off, moving slow. Inside sat Officer Linda Carson and her partner, Officer Jared Whitman, both seasoned enough to know that quiet calls often held the ugliest surprises. They stepped out of the vehicle, hands relaxed but alert. George waved them over from his porch and offered a hushed version of events, the thuds, the garage, the boys' stained hands. Officer Carson nodded, thanked him, and approached the Miller's door. Dean answered on the second knock. He was flushed, eyes darting, music still thumping from the living room. "Morning," Carson said. "We got a call from a neighbor. Mind if we come in?" Dean blinked at her. I guess." "Sure." They stepped inside. The house smelled like microwaved snacks and teen sweat. Eli and Jace were frozen on the couch, controllers idle in their hands. "Everything okay here?" Whitman asked, scanning the room. Yeah, Dean said quickly. Just hanging out. It's my birthday. Carson raised an eyebrow. Happy birthday. Where's your mom? Dean hesitated. She went out. Where to? She didn't say. When did she leave? Dean's jaw tensed. This morning. Early. Carson looked to Whitman, then back at Dean. Can we take a look around? Dean shrugged. I guess. But she's not here. Carson nodded. Let's start with the garage. Dean's reaction was subtle but telling, a twitch in his eye, a flicker of something he couldn't quite hide. Carson caught it instantly. Whitman stayed behind with the boys while Carson followed Dean through the hallway to the garage door. He hesitated before opening it. Something in there we should know about? She asked. Dean shook his head, but the movement was slow, unconvincing. Just tools. Old stuff. Carson gave him a moment, then reached past and opened the door herself. The garage was dim, the overhead light flickering slightly. The suitcase sat in the corner, partially concealed by a tarp. Carson walked straight toward it. Don't touch that, Dean blurted. Carson paused, turning to him. Why not? I don't know what's in it, he stammered. It's not mine. Carson crouched beside it, pulled the tarp away, and unzipped the top section. Inside, folded neatly, were several pieces of women's clothing. A soft blue sweater. A pair of flats. A hairbrush with blonde strands caught in the bristles. And near the bottom, dark smudges staining the lining. She leaned in. Her stomach clenched. Blood. Not fresh, but unmistakable. She stood slowly. Dean, can you explain this? I swear I didn't, he began, voice rising. I didn't put that there. Carson pulled out her radio. Carson to dispatch. We have a situation at 308 Briar Lane. Requesting backup and a forensics unit. Dean backed up against the wall, pale now. I don't know how that got here. I swear. Where is your mother? She asked again, firmer this time. I don't know, he cried. She left. She said she was leaving and then she just didn't come back. Carson stared at him, weighing the tremble in his voice, the sweat on his brow. Either he was an incredible actor, or something was deeply wrong. Backup arrived within minutes. Whitman escorted Dean back into the living room, where Jace and Eli watched with wide, shell-shocked eyes as their friend was quietly placed in handcuffs and read his rights, not under arrest, but detained for questioning. Dean didn't resist. As the police secured the property and sealed the garage as a potential crime scene, Carson retrieved Claire's cell phone from the nightstand upstairs. It had been tucked beneath a book of crossword puzzles. No recent calls. But there was one outgoing message, time-stamped at 9:04 that morning. Claire, to Dean, happy birthday. I love you, even if you think I don't. A single, simple sentence. Carson showed the screen to Dean. Did you see this? He stared at it, then slowly shook his head. No. I didn't get that. Carson checked Dean's phone. The message wasn't there. Deleted. Did you erase it? She asked. Dean looked at her, panic rising in his eyes. No. I swear I didn't. Then who did? No sign of forced entry. No broken locks. No obvious struggle inside the house. Yet a suitcase stained with blood, a missing mother, and a 17-year-old boy who claimed ignorance. Outside, the neighbors gathered in hushed groups behind fences and windows. George Hendricks stood silently on his porch, watching the officers comb through the garage with gloved hands and grim expressions. Inside the squad car, Dean sat motionless, staring at his hands. The same hands that had been covered in something dark less than an hour earlier. He whispered to himself, barely audible. I didn't do anything. But no one was listening. the forensic team arrived just after 1 o'clock, their black van rolling onto the Miller's driveway with the precision of a well-practiced routine. Yellow tape had already been stretched across the front yard, fluttering slightly in the wind. Curious neighbors hovered at the edges of their porches, pretending to sweep, fetch mail, or water plants, anything to justify staying outside and watching. Inside the garage, the air had taken on a different weight. Officer Carson stood near the open suitcase, arms crossed, as two forensic technicians in gloves and white booties knelt beside it. One carefully catalogued the contents, each piece of clothing photographed, bagged, and labeled. The other swabbed the interior lining, the blood-stained fabric soaking up attention like a sponge. Carson's mind buzzed with questions. The contents didn't suggest someone packing for a trip. No toiletries, no shoes for travel, no personal items beyond a brush and a thin gold necklace tangled around a button. This was not a woman leaving. It felt more like a woman being erased. Detective arriving, one of the technicians asked without looking up. Carson nodded. Soon. Malone's on his way. Good, the tech replied, sealing a plastic evidence bag. You'll want him on this one. Meanwhile, inside the house, Officer Whitman stood in the kitchen with Dean, who had been uncuffed but was still not free to leave. His friends were gone, parents had picked them up after a brief, awkward conversation with law enforcement, and the house felt hollow. The silence that had once felt strange was now suffocating. Dean sat at the table, hunched forward, palms flat, trying to keep his breathing steady. His face was pale, his knuckles scraped. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, and he hadn't asked for his phone. He hadn't asked for anything. His responses had grown shorter. He looked like a balloon with a slow leak, just enough air left to hold shape, but collapsing from the inside. Whitman studied him for a long moment, then poured a glass of water and set it on the table. Dean didn't touch it. You said your mom left, Whitman said gently. When did you notice something was off? Dean didn't look at him. I don't know. Maybe, around 10? What made you think she wasn't just out running errands? Dean finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, not from tears, but from the strain of holding everything back. Because she took everything. Her purse. Her keys. Her coat. But she didn't say anything. And she always says something. Whitman nodded. And the suitcase? I didn't know it was there, Dean said quickly. I swear. I didn't even go in the garage until after. After what? Dean hesitated. After the cops showed up. Before that, I heard something. But I thought it was just. I don't know. I didn't check. Whitman didn't press. The kid was unraveling. They needed to be careful. There was too much they didn't know. In the garage, the forensic team had moved on to the walls and floor, spraying a luminol mixture that revealed faint specks invisible to the naked eye. When the black light came out, a hush fell. Near the rear wall, just a few feet from the suitcase, several smears glowed a faint, ghostly blue. Blood pattern? Carson asked. Could be, the tech replied. Or something else. But it's consistent with low-velocity impact spatter. We'll need a full lab analysis. Carson's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a domestic disturbance anymore. It was a potential crime scene. And Claire Miller was still missing. At 1:45, a dark blue sedan pulled up to the edge of the tape. A man stepped out in a brown trench coat, dark slacks, and scuffed leather shoes. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept in 2 days and didn't plan to sleep for 2 more. His name was Marcus Malone. Carson met him halfway up the path. Marcus, she said with a nod. Linda, he returned. Walk me through it. She gave him the basics: missing mother, suitcase with blood-stained contents, no sign of forced entry, son acting erratically, neighbor's report, phone message discrepancy. Malone listened without interrupting, his eyes scanning the property, the garage, the windows. Where's the kid? In the kitchen. He hasn't asked for a lawyer. Says he doesn't know anything. Look scared. Good, Malone said. Scared kids talk. Eventually. He stepped inside the house like he belonged there. Dean didn't look up when he entered. Malone sat down across from him without a word, folding his hands on the table. He waited. Dean broke first. I didn't do anything, he said. I didn't touch that suitcase. I didn't touch my mom. Malone tilted his head slightly. Then who did? Dean blinked. I don't know. Malone let the silence hang. When it got too heavy, he leaned forward. Tell me about this morning. From the moment you woke up. Dean recited the basics. Breakfast. Claire's strange quietness. His own outburst. Her leaving. The party. The noises. You told your mother to disappear, Malone said. Dean nodded slowly, guilt creeping into his features. I didn't mean it. I was just mad. Words matter, Malone said. Especially the ones we say right before someone vanishes. Dean didn't respond. Malone stood and walked to the living room window. He stared at the fluttering police tape, then turned back. You ever seen that suitcase before? No, Dean said. She didn't even own a bag like that. Malone narrowed his eyes. So whose is it? Dean swallowed hard. I don't know. Malone walked slowly back toward him, then crouched so their eyes were level. Did someone else come into this house today, Dean? Dean blinked rapidly. I don't know. Maybe. Malone held the silence. Dean whispered, I thought I heard something. After she left. But I didn't check. I didn't think it was anything. Malone stood. I'm going to find out who was here, he said. And if someone set you up, I'll find that out too. But if you're hiding something, anything, it's going to make you look guilty. Understand? Dean gave a small nod. Malone left him with Whitman and stepped back outside. Carson met him by the garage. Well, she asked. He's lying about something, Malone said. But I don't think he knows where she is. He's scared. You think someone else was here? I'd bet on it, Malone said. We need to check for cameras. Doorbell, maybe something inside. Something Claire set up that nobody else knows about. Carson nodded. I'll start the sweep. Back in the garage, the evidence bags had begun to stack up, each one filled with pieces of a puzzle no one could yet solve. But the picture was forming, slowly, darkly. And in the middle of it was a boy who had wished his mother would disappear. Now she had. And the truth was buried somewhere between the seams of a suitcase, the silence of a morning gone wrong, and the eyes of a teenager who wasn't sure if he'd ever be believed again. By early evening, the Miller residence was under the full control of law enforcement. The forensics team had wrapped up their preliminary sweep, cataloging every trace of potential evidence from the garage and common areas. The interior of the house was sealed for further examination, and Officer Carson had posted an officer at the front door to restrict entry. Detective Marcus Malone now stood alone in Claire Miller's bedroom, holding her phone in one hand while using the other to scroll through a digital copy of the call logs that had just been pulled from the device. The physical phone was locked, but Malone had already called in a digital analyst from the department's cyber division to clone the device and begin examining the contents without triggering security settings. There was a pattern in the logs, but it was subtle. Claire was not a frequent texter, and most of her calls over the last week had been brief, routine. Grocery stores. A local pharmacy. One call to the school where Dean attended, and one to an out-of-state number that had yet to be identified. But what stood out wasn't what was there, it was what was missing. Between 8 and 9 that morning, Claire had made no calls. Only one outgoing text, time-stamped at exactly 9:04. Happy birthday. I love you, even if you think I don't. A quiet message, layered with hurt. The kind of thing a mother sends when she knows something is breaking beyond repair. That message had remained on her device. But when the cyber analyst finished scanning Dean's phone, which had been voluntarily handed over, something didn't add up. No trace of the message, the analyst said. Not even a deleted file entry. Malone frowned. Could he have wiped it? The analyst shook her head. Not without leaving a footprint. This wasn't a deletion, it looks like it was intercepted. Someone else had access to this phone. Malone's expression darkened. Meaning it wasn't Dean who erased the message. Exactly, she said. And get this, whoever did it, they had physical access to the phone and enough knowledge to delete the message without alerting the system. Malone turned toward the living room, his mind racing. Dean had already claimed he didn't see the message. Everyone had assumed he deleted it out of guilt or confusion. But now that was in question. The possibility opened up something new. If someone else had touched Dean's phone that morning, it meant someone else had been in the house. Possibly after Claire had left. Possibly without Dean knowing. Back in the kitchen, Dean sat in the same chair, staring down at the wood grain of the table like it held secrets he couldn't read. Malone approached quietly and sat across from him. "I have your phone," he said calmly. "We're looking into it." Dean didn't speak. Malone leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "That birthday message from your mom? The one I showed you earlier? It wasn't deleted by you. We've confirmed it." Dean's eyes flickered up. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice thin. "It means someone else had access to your phone. Maybe even earlier today. Maybe while you were distracted." Dean sat up straighter, the first sign of life in hours. "You think someone was in the house?" "We're starting to think so." Dean's jaw clenched. He seemed to be replaying something in his head, trying to piece it together. "I didn't even notice it was missing," he admitted. "I guess I left it on the table when Jace and Eli came over. We were in the living room most of the time. But I went upstairs twice." "How long were you gone each time?" 5, maybe 10 minutes. First time I was just checking if she left a note. Second time, I wanted to see if she took her coat. It was weird. I was trying to make sense of it." Malone nodded. "And while you were upstairs, anyone else could have picked up your phone?" Dean's eyes dropped to the floor. "Jace wouldn't do that. And Eli?" "I don't think so." Malone studied him. "You had a third guest this morning." Dean blinked. "No, just them." "Anyone come to the house recently who you didn't invite? Anyone your mom didn't want around?" Dean hesitated. "There was someone last month. Tyler McCoy." Malone's body stiffened just slightly. The name meant nothing yet, but it would. "He used to be my best friend," Dean said. "We had a falling out." "What happened?" Dean's fingers curled into fists. "He showed up one day, yelling. Said my mom had messed everything up. That she'd gotten into something that didn't concern her." I didn't understand what he meant. Malone didn't respond immediately. Instead, he jotted the name down in his notebook and underlined it. Why would Tyler be angry with Claire? Dean shook his head. "I don't know. He never told me. He just kept saying she ruined something. Then he ghosted me. We haven't talked since. But he's been to the house before." "Yeah. A lot, back when we were still friends." Malone stood, thoughtful. If someone wanted to manipulate what happened today, they'd need two things: access and a reason. He moved to the front of the house, signaled to Officer Carson, and called for a full background check on Tyler McCoy. While waiting, he circled back to the one piece of technology most people forget is always watching: the smart speaker. He located a device in the kitchen, a voice-activated assistant that Claire had likely used for grocery lists and reminders. What most people didn't realize was that these devices kept logs, audio snippets of recent interactions. Malone pulled out his phone and accessed the app associated with the device. Claire's phone had been linked to the same account, which gave them administrative control. He scrolled through the recent commands. What's the weather today? Play morning playlist. Set reminder, check Dean's gift. Then 1, timestamped at 9:21. Stop recording. Malone stared at the screen. That wasn't a command Claire had ever used before. And it wasn't one she was likely to give unless she had something to hide, or was being forced. Carson, he called, his voice low but urgent. I want every piece of audio pulled from this smart system. Everything from the last 12 hours. She nodded and moved quickly. It wasn't much, but it was a breadcrumb. And now, they had a new name. A new direction. If Tyler McCoy had been in the house, or near it, they would find him. And they would find Claire. Because this case was no longer about a missing mother or a runaway. It was about a manipulated narrative. Someone had crafted a lie and left a teenage boy to take the fall. Malone could feel it in his gut, this was planned. Now he just had to find out why. Marcus Malone stepped into the command post set up in the Miller driveway just after dusk. The yellow crime scene tape glowed under the streetlights, and several uniformed officers milled about, clipboard in hand, walking between police cars, the forensics van, and the front porch. Malone's coat was damp from a light rain that had started falling, slick on his shoulders. He carried a small leather satchel with his tools, notebook, voice recorder, lamp, extra batteries. He introduced himself to Officer Carson and Officer Whitman, who had been holding the fort since the earlier chaos. Carson briefed him quietly, voice low enough for only Malone to hear over the distant storm and crickets. She covered the timeline: Claire's phone message at 9:04, suspicious disappearance, the suitcase in the garage, the stained clothing, Dean's phone and the missing message, gaps in his story, bloodstains lit by luminol, possible third party. Whitman added that neighbors reported seeing someone unfamiliar lurking near the side gate around 9:30, but no one got a good look. The description was vague: tall, slender, possibly wearing a hoodie. Malone nodded. He could feel the haze of confusion thickening around this case. It was the kind he liked, messy, with people hiding things, more questions than answers. He moved past the tape toward the garage, which had become a center of activity. The forensic team was folding up tarps, moving lights, bagging evidence. Malone crouched beside one of the evidence markers near the floor where blood luminol had glowed. The tech looked up. Pattern still not smooth, Malone said, pointing. Looks like someone dragged something through, maybe leaned over. The tech nodded. Could be. We'll map out the spatter in 3 dimensions. Might show angle of impact, movement path. Malone pulled out a small evidence bag from his satchel, gloves. He slipped them on, then gently touched the edge of the suitcase. It was sealed, but he inspected the lock, hinges, and how the tarp had been placed over it. Raindrops had seeped a little under the garage door, but the suitcase was dry, protected. Someone had concealed it carefully. Someone who knew what they were doing. He stood and turned toward the house. Whitman was at the front door with Dean, still in the empty living room, shadows falling across his face. Malone walked in. Dean, I know this is overwhelming, Malone said, voice measured. I need you to trust me. I'm going to ask you things you might not want to answer. It'll help us find out what really happened to your mom. Dean looked up. He blinked. The strain in his eyes was raw. He nodded. Malone opened his notebook, pulled out a pen. He asked about Tyler McCoy again. Dean's previous account had been incomplete, Malone could sense. He asked, when had Tyler last come over, exactly? What was said in the fight months before? Did Tyler ever threaten Claire directly or imply harm? Dean hesitated. It was after school one day. Tyler came to the door. He was yelling that she had messed up things no parent should indicate. He didn't name what, but he said after that, everything changed. He stayed for a while, wouldn't leave my room. I didn't want him there, but Malone raised a hand gently. Did you see anything of Claire's stuff in Tyler's car or at his house? I don't know. I was young. I don't think so. But Tyler's been hanging around lately. I heard him talking to someone on the phone. He mentioned taking care of things. It might have been coincidence. Malone's gaze hardened. Do you think Tyler had motive to do more than talk? Dean swallowed. Maybe. I just assumed anger. Not this. Malone closed his notebook. We'll check Tyler's alibi. We'll check phone records, messages. See where he was when everything started. And your mom, someone must know where she is. Malone exited to the porch where wet pavement reflected the police lights. He called Carson close. You said neighbors saw someone near the side gate around 9:30. Was there any camera footage from that area? Carson nodded. We canvassed a few houses. One neighbor has a security doorbell camera. It records motion. He agreed to share last 24 hours. We collected the footage. Malone asked to see it immediately. The neighbor's camera angle captured part of the driveway and the side fence. Blurred figure, hooded, moving fast, almost slipping in and out of shadows. The time-stamped motion was 9:32. The figure paused at the side gate, then disappeared behind the Miller house toward the backyard. No face visible. No clear identity. Could it be Tyler? Malone whispered, more to himself than to Carson. Carson squared her shoulders. Maybe. But the clothes match what neighbors said, dark hoodie, slender frame. Not a lot to go on. Malone considered the living room again, then the phone message discrepancy. Dean's phone was accessed by someone else. Let's determine if Tyler ever had access to Dean's phone. Did they share a class or project? Did Tyler borrow Dean's phone previously? Dean had said no to both, but Malone noted that memory under stress is unreliable. Malone walked upstairs to Claire's bedroom. He opened her closet. Her coat was still missing. Her kurta scarf and several pairs of shoes were gone. But there was one thing not missing, her journal, one she kept locked with a key, hidden in a drawer in the desk. Malone retrieved it carefully, noted its lock wasn't tampered with. Back downstairs, in the commandeered kitchen, Malone sat with Whitman and Carson. He laid out evidence, missing items from Claire's room, phone logs, the doorbell footage, Tyler's possible involvement. He formed a plan, track Tyler's phone, interview him, check forensic analysis of the blood in the garage, ultimately find Claire and clear up whether Dean is innocent or being manipulated. Malone turned to Whitman. Keep Dean protected. He's most likely an unwitting pawn. Treat him accordingly. No pressure until we have more facts. Whitman nodded, concern in his eyes. Malone then went outside, phone pressed to ear. He called for a detective team to interrogate Tyler McCoy. He also made contact with the cyber unit to reconstruct Dean's phone usage, any app logs, any nearby Bluetooth connections that could place somebody in the house earlier. Night fell, rain picking up. Malone paced beneath the yellow glow of street lamps, watching the Miller house, the flashing lights, officers talking quietly. The shapes of trees cast long shadows across the lawn. He thought of Claire, where could she be? Was she taken? Did she leave willingly? Or was everything a frame, a setup? He listened to the wind in the trees, the way water dripped off eaves. Somewhere in the dark, a story was waiting, twisted, cruel, tangled. Malone whispered under his breath, I'll find you, Claire. And I'll find the truth. He pulled out his recorder, pressed play. There was static, then the neighbor's doorbell camera clip confirming the figure at 9:32. It was small. It was blurry. But it was something. He ended the clip and turned off the device. Tomorrow, they would interrogate Tyler. They would bring Dean in for more detail. They would check the receipt from the gift box, look at the vendor, trace shipping. They would follow every thread. Because once Detective Malone had stepped in, inertia was over. The investigation was alive. Detective Marcus Malone returned to the Miller residence early the next morning, the sun still low behind a veil of thin gray clouds. The front yard was quiet now, no cruisers, no flashing lights, no curious neighbors. Just the yellow police tape rustling faintly in the breeze and the faded chalk drawings on the sidewalk from a week prior. Malone stood on the porch for a long moment before entering, as if the house itself were holding its breath, unwilling to release its secrets without a fight. Inside, the silence felt different from the day before. Not just empty, alert. Watching. The kind of silence that suggested someone had left behind more than just a suitcase and a missing presence. He stepped into the kitchen first, scanning it with fresh eyes. Every corner, every shelf, every piece of decor. The house was modest but clean, carefully maintained. Claire Miller had been meticulous in her habits. Organized. Intentional. And people like that didn't just vanish without leaving breadcrumbs. Carson joined him a few minutes later with a new file in her hands. "We got the audio dump from the smart speaker overnight," she said, passing him a printed list of timestamps and transcriptions. "Most of it's harmless, playlists, reminders, grocery notes. But there's a command from yesterday that stands out." Malone read it. "Stop recording. Timestamp, 9:21 in the morning. That still bugs me," she continued. "The system only stops recording temporarily if you disable the microphone. But you have to physically push the mute button." Claire didn't seem like the type to disable her own tech, Malone murmured. "No. And the rest of her history doesn't show that command being used before." Malone nodded slowly. Whoever was in this house didn't want to be seen. But they were too late. Carson raised a brow. "You think we have something better?" He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he walked toward the hallway, remembering something Dean had said in passing. Something about a clock. He entered the living room and found it easily. Hanging above the fireplace, an antique wooden wall clock, the kind with a swinging pendulum and tiny glass door. But it wasn't ticking. He opened the glass, moved the pendulum gently, it remained still. He took a closer look at the face. One of the hour markers, at the 3, had been replaced with a small, dark circle. Almost unnoticeable. It wasn't a repair. It was a lens. Malone stepped back. "Carson. I think Claire hit a camera." Within minutes, the forensics team was back inside. The clock was carefully removed and disassembled at the dining table, revealing a tiny pinhole camera mounted inside the hollowed-out frame. It wasn't connected to Wi-Fi. No cloud access. Local storage only, an SD card hidden inside the back panel. Malone retrieved it himself and slipped it into a forensic laptop they had brought with them. As the files loaded, everyone leaned in. There were several short clips, motion-triggered, it seemed, covering the last 48 hours. They scrolled past footage of Claire preparing food, watering plants, talking softly to herself in the kitchen. Then, footage from the morning of Dean's birthday. 9:12. Claire walks into frame, keys in hand, coat on, her expression unreadable. She sets something on the counter, a wallet, maybe, and looks toward the back door. Her mouth moves. She's talking, but there's no sound. The camera doesn't record audio. She walks out of frame. 9:14. Motion triggers again. A new figure enters through the back door. Hood up, face turned away. Male. Thin build. Moves quickly toward the hallway, heading in the direction Claire had just taken. His head turned slightly at the camera, just a flash of a face. Malone froze the frame. It wasn't perfect, but the jawline, the nose, the high cheekbones, he had seen that face before. A school photo. A juvenile record. Tyler McCoy. The timestamp showed him entering after Claire had left the kitchen, but before she had left the house entirely. Another clip. 9:26. Same figure walking briskly out the way he came, now holding something under one arm. A bag. A coat? Hard to tell. He doesn't glance at the camera this time. Then, 10 minutes of nothing. Just the empty living room, a flickering shadow of light as clouds shift outside. Get this frame to facial recognition, Malone said. Now. Carson was already on the phone. Malone leaned closer to the screen. Claire had either known something might happen, or she had been living in enough fear to install hidden surveillance. That clock camera wasn't new. She'd planned it. Expected to use it. Maybe even suspected Tyler for a long time. Why hadn't she reported him? Why leave her son exposed? The answer, whatever it was coming into focus. Later that afternoon, Malone sat down with Dean again. This time, they were in the station. Not a formal interrogation, but not a casual conversation either. The boy had slept, eaten, and still looked like he hadn't taken a breath since the day before. Malone placed a printed still from the video in front of him. Do you recognize this? Dean's eyes widened. That's Tyler. Were you aware he came into your house yesterday? Dean shook his head. No. I didn't see him. I swear. He never said anything. He deleted the message from your mom's phone. And possibly planted the suitcase. Dean looked stunned. Why would he do that? You said your mom knew something. Something he didn't want anyone to find out. I think she documented it. And I think she left us something to follow. Dean was quiet for a long time. There was a box. In her closet. She kept it locked. I don't know what was in it. She never said. Malone made a note. We're going to find out, he said. But Dean, this means you're no longer our suspect. You've been set up. Dean didn't cry. He just lowered his head, the relief too tangled in exhaustion to process. That night, Malone returned to the Miller house one more time. He stood in Claire's bedroom, flashlight scanning the closet. Behind a row of hanging clothes, tucked behind a stack of old shoeboxes, he found it, a wooden box with a metal clasp and a combination lock. He didn't know the code. But he would find it. Because Claire Miller had hidden the truth in every corner of her life. And the real story was just beginning to surface. The photograph of Tyler McCoy pulled from the hidden camera footage was now at the center of the investigation. Within 24 hours, the image had been enhanced, verified, and matched through facial recognition to school records, juvenile files, and a municipal ID issued 2 years prior. The result wasn't just a name, it was a profile. Tyler Jacob McCoy, age 17, formerly enrolled at East Maplewood High. Same school as Dean. Suspended last semester for fighting. No current address listed. Parents divorced. Father relocated out of state. Mother, deceased. Cause of death, overdose. Detective Marcus Malone stood in front of the incident board in the Maplewood Police Department conference room. Claire's picture stared back at him from the center of the web, surrounded by names, timelines, arrows, and unanswered questions. But now, one arrow pointed boldly to a new photo, Tyler's school portrait. Fresh tape held it in place. Across the top, Malone had written 2 words in thick red marker, primary suspect. Where is he now? Malone asked without turning. Carson, seated nearby, flipped through a report. No current residence. Last known location was his aunt's place in Lincoln Park, but she says he hasn't stayed there in weeks. Cell phone's been inactive since yesterday morning. Malone tapped a pen against his thigh. He knew what he was doing. He didn't just break in. He covered his tracks. Deleted messages. Knew about the camera in the speaker system. He's not some dumb kid, Carson agreed. He planned this. Malone turned, eyes narrowed. I want to know why. What does he have against Claire? What did she discover? Dean mentioned a falling out. Said Tyler blamed Claire for something personal. Something that pushed him this far, Malone muttered. A knock on the door interrupted them. An officer entered with a sealed evidence bag. Sir, this just came in from the lab. Partial fingerprint match on the suitcase handle. It's Tyler's. And, the officer hesitated. We pulled a few latent prints from the brush inside. Some belonged to Claire. But one was male. Not Dean. Not Tyler. We're running it now. Malone took the report and scanned it quickly. Another unknown? A possible third person? He looked at Carson. There's more to this. She didn't need convincing. That afternoon, they returned to the Miller home to retrieve the locked wooden box found in Claire's closet. After Dean confirmed it had always been there, and that he didn't know the combination, Malone authorized a secure transport to the station where a locksmith under department contract managed to open it without damage. Inside were a few documents, an envelope labeled, "If anything happens to me," and a USB flash drive wrapped in tissue. Malone opened the envelope first. Claire's handwriting was steady but urgent. "To whoever finds this, especially if it's Marcus Malone, you were right. I was being watched. Tyler came to the house again, not long ago. He said my husband's death wasn't an accident. He said our family took something from his. I didn't understand. Not at first. But then I started digging. And what I found. I can't even believe it myself." The letter continued, detailing how Claire had gone through old emails, legal documents, insurance papers. She suspected foul play involving her husband's old business dealings, something that may have involved Tyler's father. There had been an unresolved lawsuit between the two families. Something about fraud. The court records had been sealed. If Tyler is doing this to Dean, to me, it's because he believes we destroyed his life. But he doesn't know the truth. Not all of it. The letter ended with a final line. "Find Tyler. But don't stop there. There's someone else." Malone turned his attention to the USB drive. It was immediately taken to the department's digital forensics lab. After a few minutes, the contents were decrypted and projected on a screen, a folder containing several PDF files, scanned images of old letters, and one video file labeled July_interview. He opened the video. Claire sat in the living room, the same one currently sealed with police tape. She looked directly at the camera, composed but afraid. "This is Claire Miller," she said. "It's July 14th. I'm recording this in case anything happens to me. I need someone to know what's been going on. Tyler McCoy has come by multiple times. He blames me for his mother's death. I didn't even know her. But now I'm starting to think his father, Alan McCoy, had a deeper grudge. My husband worked with him briefly. There was a deal. Something about medical claims. I didn't ask questions back then. But now, I think Alan used my husband as a scapegoat. And when he died, I stopped digging. That was a mistake." She paused, eyes lowering. "Dean doesn't know any of this. I've kept it from him. But if he's in danger now, if I'm not around, please protect him. Please." The video ended. Malone sat back in his chair, the room still. He now had motive. Tyler wasn't just lashing out over a teenage fight, he was carrying a legacy of resentment, twisted through tragedy and likely manipulated by a parent who had poisoned his perception of the Millers. Alan McCoy, though long out of state, was now officially part of the investigation. "Run a background on Alan," Malone said. "Find out where he is now. And contact Lincoln Park authorities. Get a search warrant for Tyler's last known address." That night, another call came in, an anonymous tip placed from a gas station on the Ohio border. The caller didn't give a name, but the message was clear. "Check the cabin on Hawthorne Ridge. Near the old ranger station. Someone's hiding." It was too specific to ignore. By sunrise, Malone and a team were en route. As they climbed the wooded path leading to Hawthorne Ridge, snow still patchy beneath trees and a thin mist rising, the outline of an old hunting cabin came into view. Weather-beaten, forgotten. But not empty. A car was parked out front. One that matched a bolo from the day before. Tyler's aunt's stolen sedan. Malone signaled the officers. Guns drawn, they moved in. Inside, they found signs of someone staying there: food wrappers, bottled water, a blanket on the floor. But no Tyler. What they did find, however, changed everything. A burner phone with one sent message on the screen. "I did what you said. She's gone. I'm done now." The message had been sent to a contact saved only as A. Malone stared at the screen, the pieces falling into place. Claire's letter had been right. Tyler wasn't acting alone. And whoever was, this went far deeper than a teenage vendetta. The attic of the Miller house hadn't been opened in years. Dust lined the edges of the pull-down ladder like a protective film, and the faint smell of insulation drifted down with the first tug on the cord. Malone stood at the bottom of the steps, flashlight in hand, while Carson waited behind him, clipboard under her arm. They had combed through every inch of the house twice already, but after reviewing Claire's letter and the digital files she had left behind, Malone suspected there was still something missing, something she had hidden where no one, not even Dean, would think to look. The flashlight cut through the dim air of the attic, revealing boxes, old holiday decorations, and stacks of forgotten furniture. Malone climbed slowly, cautious of the creaking wood beneath his feet. Every movement sent tiny motes of dust spiraling through the narrow beams of light. He scanned the space, methodical, patient. Then he saw it. A small wooden chest tucked behind an old rocking chair, its surface partially covered with an old quilt. The chest was locked, but the latch had rusted through. Malone pried it open with a flat tool and lifted the lid. Inside was a single manila envelope, yellowed and worn. The name on the front was handwritten in thick black ink. Dean. But it wasn't just a letter from a mother to her son. The envelope was thick. Inside were several pages of folded documents and one smaller, tightly folded note taped to the front page. Malone carefully unfolded the smaller note and read the brief message aloud. "If you are reading this, then something has gone very wrong. Dean, I didn't know how to tell you what I discovered. I didn't know if you'd believe me. But the truth is, your father's death was never just an accident." Malone read on silently, eyes narrowing with every line. The main letter was a detailed account written by Claire. She had dated it nearly 3 weeks before her disappearance. In it, she explained how, after Tyler's visit, she had begun searching through the archives of her late husband's files. Most had been shredded, deleted, or removed. But one external hard drive, buried in a storage bin in the garage, had still worked. It contained emails, some between her husband and a man named Alan McCoy. Others involved their former insurance firm. Claire's husband had been unknowingly pulled into a fraudulent scheme to manipulate medical claims, scanning patient records, forging signatures, rerouting payouts to shell companies. He had thought he was doing consulting work. But Claire discovered that Alan McCoy had created the scheme and used her husband as the legal front. When her husband started asking questions, he was found dead, supposedly the victim of an accidental overdose while working late in a hotel room. Claire had always believed it was a suicide. But now, she suspected otherwise. She included copies of the emails, notes about the case, and one particularly damning message forwarded to her from an anonymous address, likely someone inside the insurance company who wanted the truth out. The message read, "He knew. He wanted out. They silenced him. Don't trust anyone. Alan isn't working alone." Malone flipped through the pages again, stunned by the level of detail. Claire had done the job of a private investigator all on her own, risking everything to uncover a chain of corruption that extended far beyond Maplewood. Why didn't she go to the police? Carson asked behind him. She didn't know who to trust, Malone muttered. And she thought Dean might be in danger. If she came forward, they'd target him. He paused. But she didn't just collect evidence, she left instructions. At the very bottom of the envelope was a final handwritten page, addressed directly to Malone. "Detective Malone, if you found this, then I'm asking for your help. The people behind this won't stop until they've erased every loose end. Dean is one of those ends. So am I. You need to find Tyler, but don't stop there. Look at the legal records from 2008, there's a sealed court case, McCoy vs. Everway Medical. Get it unsealed. That's where it started. Malone took a deep breath. They weren't just dealing with a revenge-driven teenager anymore. This was organized. Calculated. And it started years ago. He carefully resealed the envelope, stored it in an evidence bag, and descended the attic ladder. Back at the station, he called in a legal advisor and a court liaison to begin the process of unsealing the lawsuit Claire had mentioned. The case, McCoy vs. Everway Medical, had been dismissed under confidential arbitration. Both parties had agreed to a non-disclosure. The court clerk noted that Malone would need special authorization to access any of the sealed records. "Get me that authorization," Malone said flatly. "Now." As the paperwork began to move, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. The forensic team had matched the second unknown fingerprint from the suitcase to a name, Benjamin Ruiz, age 42. Former accountant at Everway Medical. No known connection to Tyler McCoy or the Miller family. No recent employment. Last known address in Cincinnati, Ohio. Malone wasted no time. He put out a statewide alert, flagged Ruiz for questioning, and had a team begin tracking financial activity, including bank withdrawals, burner phones, and travel patterns. By evening, a new alert arrived: Ruiz had used an ATM in Akron. Surveillance showed him traveling alone, wearing a ball cap and hoodie, but the face matched. Malone made the call. "Bring him in." That night, as teams mobilized to apprehend Ruiz, Malone sat alone in his office, the letter from the attic spread out before him. Claire's words echoed in his mind, not just as clues, but as a warning. She had walked into something massive, something hidden beneath years of silence and falsified records. And she'd known it might cost her life. But she had also known that someone, eventually, would listen. And now, he was listening. As he packed the file and stood, Carson entered with a new report. "Dean remembered something," she said. "Something about the night before Claire vanished. He said she was packing a bag, not the suitcase in the garage. A different one. Smaller. Said she told him she might go away for a while. For safety." Malone paused. "So she ran?" Carson nodded. "Or tried to." Malone's jaw tightened. "Then she might still be alive. And if she was out there, scared, in hiding, waiting for someone to find the trail she left behind." Malone picked up the bag of letters, his coat, and headed for the door. He had a new suspect. A new location. And maybe, finally, a chance to bring Claire home. The two-way mirror in interrogation room 2 reflected more than just the sterile walls and flickering overhead light. It captured the tension, the weight of the past closing in on a boy who no longer looked like a suspect, but like someone carrying the shattered remains of trust. Dean sat at the metal table, shoulders hunched, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears, but from sleeplessness. His foot tapped rhythmically on the floor, a nervous energy he couldn't contain. Across from him sat Detective Marcus Malone, files neatly stacked, recorder already running. "Dean," Malone began, his tone calm but firm. "We're close to understanding everything. We have evidence from your mother's journal, the camera footage, and that hidden letter in the attic. What we need now is clarity. You told Officer Carson your mom packed a bag the night before she disappeared. What exactly did you see?" Dean didn't answer at first. He rubbed his face with both hands, as if trying to summon the memory into focus. "She wasn't panicked," he finally said. "But she wasn't normal either. She kept checking the window. She told me she might be gone for a couple of days. That it was just a precaution. I asked her if someone had threatened her. She said no, but I didn't believe her." "Did she say where she was going?" "She started to. Said something about crossing the state line and keeping Dean out of it. Then she stopped and said it'd be better if I didn't know. She hugged me for the first time in months. Then went to bed." Malone leaned forward. "What about Tyler? Did you see or hear anything unusual that might link him to that night? Dean hesitated, then nodded slowly. I didn't hear Tyler. But I heard the back door creak around 2 in the morning. I thought it was Mom leaving early, but I didn't get up. I should have checked. It could have been her. Or someone else. Dean's silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, outside the room, Carson stood at the observation window, watching with crossed arms. She turned as another officer approached, holding a manila envelope. Ruiz is in holding, the officer said. Picked him up just outside Akron. He tried to run but didn't get far. Carson nodded. Is he talking? Not yet. But we pulled messages from his burner. All communication with a contact saved as stopped right after Claire disappeared. Run every alias, every contact list Ruiz ever had. I want that connection made. Back in the interrogation room, Malone stood and walked slowly around the table, his voice lowering slightly. Dean, I need to ask you something difficult. We believe Tyler was manipulated by someone older, someone more dangerous. Do you remember any mention of someone else? Maybe a name your mom said, or something from Tyler? Dean's brows drew together. Tyler talked about his dad sometimes. But mostly in anger. He said his dad had been taken down by my family. That Claire let it happen. Malone stopped pacing. Did he say that exactly? Claire let it happen? Yeah, Dean said. Like she had something to do with what ruined his life. Malone returned to the table and tapped the top file. We believe Tyler's father, Alan McCoy, used your dad to commit insurance fraud. Your dad found out and tried to back out. Alan set him up to take the fall, then disappeared from public view when things got messy. Dean looked stunned. You think Tyler knows that? I think Tyler was fed a different version of that story. One where your mother was the villain. That kind of anger, twisted from childhood, can drive someone to believe they're justified. Dean sat back in his chair, voice almost inaudible. So Tyler came after me, because of something that happened between our parents? And he may have done it thinking he was protecting his father's legacy, Malone added. Or getting revenge. Malone gathered the files and turned off the recorder. You're no longer under suspicion, he said. But we'll need your continued help. Dean nodded, then leaned back, breathing out a quiet, exhausted, okay. An hour later, Ruiz sat in interrogation room 3, wrists cuffed to the table. He was older than expected, gray creeping into his stubble, eyes glassy from lack of sleep or the fear of what was coming. Malone entered the room alone. Ruiz offered no greeting, just stared straight ahead. I'm Marcus Malone, he said. You already know why you're here. Ruiz didn't respond. We found your print on the brush in the suitcase. You carried it, or touched it while it was being packed. The boy in that house had nothing to do with it. Still silence. Malone dropped a file onto the table. The letter from Claire. The footage from the clock camera. The burner phone texts. The ATM surveillance. All of it. We also know you were in contact with Tyler McCoy. But what we want to know now is who you were working for. Who's, Ruiz cracked a faint, humorless smile. You think I'm going to talk? Malone leaned forward. Claire Miller is still missing. If she's dead, and we find out you knew where she was, you'll never breathe free air again. Ruiz looked up. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not defiance, conflict. I didn't kill her, he said finally. I just made the drop. What drop? Ruiz swallowed. I was told to bring the suitcase, make it look like Dean did something. Mess up the scene. I didn't know it was going that far. Who gave the order? Ruiz's eyes dropped to the table. Tyler. Tyler doesn't have that kind of money. That kind of reach. Ruiz didn't speak. Malone pressed harder. We found his burner. The only outgoing message was to A. That's who he reports to. If you're trying to protect Alan McCoy, don't. He'll cut you loose the second you're no longer useful. Ruiz's jaw clenched. You think I'm scared of McCoy? I think you should be, Malone said. And I think you're not the only one who's going to get buried if we don't find Claire. Ruiz looked away. She's not dead, he muttered. Malone froze. What did you say? Ruiz's voice was barely above a whisper. He told Tyler to keep her alive. Said killing her would bring too much attention. Where is she? I don't know, Ruiz replied quickly. I swear. I was out after the suitcase. Tyler had someone else move her. Malone stood, blood pounding. You're going to give me every number, every name, every detail you remember, he said. Because if she's still alive, I'm not letting her disappear again. That night, armed with Ruiz's partial confession and the growing evidence chain, Malone signed a new warrant. It wasn't just for Tyler McCoy. It was for Alan McCoy himself. The storm that Claire Miller had predicted was finally at the door. The road to the Ohio border stretched long and empty, flanked by fields browned by the onset of fall and power lines that cut through the horizon like stitches holding the land together. Detective Marcus Malone sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked department vehicle, reading over the transcripts of the latest phone logs pulled from Benjamin Ruiz's burner. The GPS pings, analyzed by the department's digital forensics team, had triangulated the final location where Ruiz had received a call from a secondary burner phone, the same number labeled as on Tyler McCoy's phone. The call lasted 12 seconds. But it wasn't the call that mattered. It was where it came from. A small roadside motel, 20 minutes outside of Sandusky, Ohio. Off the books. No security cameras. Cash-only rooms. The same motel where, hours earlier, a local gas station clerk had reported seeing a woman matching Claire Miller's description. Disheveled, scared, and asking if anyone had a phone she could borrow. Malone gripped the edge of his seat. He had been chasing shadows for days, tracing lies, lifting fragments from bloodstains, following the unraveling threads of a decades-old deception. But now the trail was real. Tangible. And if the reports were accurate, Claire Miller was alive. They arrived at the motel shortly after sunrise. The building was a long, single-story line of weathered doors and faded siding, the kind of place where people went when they wanted to disappear. A patrol car from the Sandusky Sheriff's Department was already on site, its engine running, 2 officers standing near the reception office. Malone flashed his badge and moved fast. Room number? He asked the nearest officer. 14, the deputy replied. Checked in under the name, Eliza Nolan. No ID, cash payment. Clerk says she hasn't left since last night. Malone's heart pounded as he approached the room. He motioned for the others to stay back, then knocked twice. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Claire, he called. It's Detective Marcus Malone. I'm here to help you. You're safe now. A pause. Then, movement. The lock turned with a soft click. The door cracked open just enough for one pale, trembling eye to appear in the gap. Malone held his breath. The eye widened in recognition. The door opened fully. Claire stood there, wearing a worn hoodie, jeans, and an expression that looked hollowed out by fear, disbelief, and exhaustion. Her face was bruised, her lips slightly swollen, but she was on her feet. Marcus, she whispered. You found me. He nodded once, unable to say anything else. She swayed slightly, and he stepped forward instinctively, catching her elbow. You're safe now, he said. You're going to be okay. Claire didn't cry. She just nodded, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. The moment was too raw for tears. Inside the motel room, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a department-issued thermal blanket. The small space smelled of stale air and cleaning fluid, but it didn't matter. She was here. She was alive. Carson arrived minutes later, and a female officer from Sandusky took photos of her injuries, just in case she declined to press charges later. Claire permitted everything. She didn't flinch, didn't resist. Malone waited until the others stepped out before sitting beside her. "You were right," he said. "About everything." Claire looked at him, her voice still hoarse. "How much do you know?" "Enough to arrest Alan McCoy the moment we find him. Ruiz is in custody. Tyler's on the run, but we'll catch him. Dean is safe." At the mention of her son's name, Claire closed her eyes. "I thought he'd hate me forever," she murmured. "He thought you were dead. And he's been fighting for you. He helped us." Claire covered her face with her hands, her breath shuddering. "I left because I heard them talking. Tyler and someone else, I don't know who, inside my house. They said they were going to use Dean to scare me into silence. That they needed leverage. I waited until they went into the garage, then slipped out through the side yard. I ran." She looked up at him. "I ran, Marcus. Like a coward. I should have stayed. I should have protected him." "You did," Malone said firmly. "You stayed alive. You left the notes. The files. You gave us the truth." Claire didn't respond for a long time. Then she asked, "Can I see him?" "You will," Malone promised. "Soon. First, let's get you cleared by the hospital. Then we take your statement. And then, we bring them all down." Back at the station, the news that Claire had been found triggered a whirlwind of movement. Officers scrambled to build the case file, tie together the physical evidence with her testimony, and coordinate with the FBI, now involved due to the interstate nature of the fraud and abduction. Dean was brought in under protective escort. When he entered the interview room and saw his mother standing there, he froze. "Mom?" Claire turned, her breath catching. They didn't speak at first. They just stared. Then Dean walked forward slowly. And Claire embraced him like she would never let go. No words. Just a mother and her son, both fractured in their own ways, finally whole again. Malone watched from outside the room, arms crossed, jaw tight. It wasn't over. Tyler McCoy was still out there. Alan McCoy had vanished from his listed address in Nevada 2 days before the first police visit. The last traceable transaction on his credit card was a fuel purchase at a gas station near a private airstrip in Kansas. But now Malone had Claire's testimony. He had Ruiz's partial confession. He had the hidden files. And most importantly, he had a name. Alan McCoy. Not just a disgraced businessman. A fugitive. A manipulator. A man who had used his son as a weapon and left a wake of destruction behind him. Malone didn't care how far he'd gone. He would find him. And when he did, the truth wouldn't be buried again. The sky over Maplewood was a canvas of charcoal clouds when the break finally came. Rain had been threatening for days, but it wasn't until late Thursday morning that the first drops tapped against the windows of the precinct. Detective Marcus Malone stood in his office, staring at the new intelligence report spread across his desk. The pages detailed Tyler McCoy's last known movements, confirmed sightings, burner phone records, and the subtle trail of manipulation he had left behind. But it wasn't enough to know what Tyler had done. Malone needed to understand why, not just the surface-level motive of revenge or delusion, but the full architecture of Tyler's thinking. The complexity behind his choices, the chilling precision of his actions. Because Tyler hadn't just tried to disappear Claire Miller. He had constructed a trap, one aimed at Dean, one that could have buried him forever. The turning point came with a single sentence. Carson entered Malone's office carrying a report from the behavioral analysis consultant they'd looped in the day before. She dropped it on the desk and pointed to the section highlighted in red ink. He wanted to break her family before she could break the truth, she said. That was the objective. Malone read the words aloud. Subject appears to exhibit strategic obsession, not just revenge. Pattern indicates he viewed Claire Miller not only as a threat but as a symbol of the institution that silenced his own family. The son was a pawn, but one Tyler intended to sacrifice if necessary. Malone let the paper fall. So Tyler hadn't just been used. He was complicit. Deliberate. Tactical. He had planned it all. And now it was time to unravel his plan. The first thread came from the phone logs. The number saved as A. Alan McCoy had been the central communication line for months. But another number had appeared 3 days before Claire's disappearance, used only once, a call placed from Tyler's burner to a contact listed simply as G. The tech team traced it to a prepaid device activated near Sandusky, then immediately shut off after the call. Malone ordered a full pull on Tyler's last year of academic, medical, and behavioral records. He visited East Maplewood High and spoke with former teachers, counselors, even the security officer. Most described Tyler as intelligent, quiet, detached. But one, an English teacher named Ms. Keene, gave Malone something invaluable. "I caught him once in the teacher's office after hours," she said. "He was copying disciplinary files. Said he was curious. But when I checked later, only one file was missing." "Whose?" Malone asked. "Claire Miller's husband. Daniel Miller. He used to do volunteer talks here before he died. He gave presentations on ethics in business." Malone felt something twist inside him. Tyler had started digging long before the incident. Long before Dean's birthday. That afternoon, a breakthrough came from Ruiz. Pressed further in interrogation, he finally admitted that Tyler had been preparing for weeks, setting up the scene at the Miller house, sourcing the suitcase from a thrift shop in Detroit, purchasing second-hand clothes similar to Claire's, and coordinating with someone, likely a contact of his father's, to access the Miller property from a blind spot on the neighbor's side. Ruiz had delivered the suitcase. But Tyler had planted everything else. Claire's missing coat? Replaced with a duplicate, hidden in the suitcase, stained with stage blood Tyler had purchased online. The phone deletion? Done using a USB jack cloned from a backup of Dean's device weeks earlier, lifted during a sleepover. The ultimate goal? Frame Dean for his mother's murder and then leak the truth to the press. But there was something darker buried underneath. Malone uncovered it in a draft email found on Tyler's laptop, recovered from a storage locker near the Ohio border. The email was unsent, but saved. To whom it may concern. By the time you read this, it'll be too late to change the truth. Claire Miller destroyed my family. She let my mother rot in a hospital bed while her husband played the hero. You praised him. You buried her. I'm here to make sure the world sees the truth. Dean Miller will answer for the lies his family built their lives on. And Claire will never speak again. T. The signature was chilling in its finality. Tyler wasn't simply reacting. He believed he was correcting a narrative. Malone stared at the screen for a long time. He thought of Dean's face when he saw his mother again. The way he clung to her like a child. And he thought of Tyler, alone, weaponized by a father who had vanished the moment things got dangerous. That night, they finally traced Tyler's location to a safe house used years ago by one of Alan McCoy's associates in Youngstown. Surveillance placed a young male entering the property through a side door. 2 duffel bags. No vehicle. No visible phone use. Malone assembled a team. They moved in at dawn. Inside, the safe house was sparse but functional: canned food, bottled water, military-style cot, a gas generator. And on the far wall, maps. Dozens of them. Circles drawn around the Miller residence. Markers placed at bus stops, schools, shopping centers. Dates and times scribbled in a tight, meticulous hand. They found Tyler in the back room. No weapons. No resistance. Just a boy sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes open, unblinking, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Malone knelt in front of him. You planned this down to the last breath, he said. Tyler didn't blink. She took everything. She tried to save you, Malone replied. You just couldn't see it. Tyler looked past him, his voice flat. She was part of it. My father said so. And your system? It never punished anyone. My mother died alone. She deserved justice. Malone stood. You're going to get your justice, he said. But not the kind you wanted. Back at the station, Tyler was processed, charged with attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, obstruction, and attempted manslaughter. Alan McCoy's warrant was now federal. And the case, long buried beneath sealed court records and falsified documents, was officially reopened as a criminal investigation. Claire was safe. Dean was safe. But the truth still had weight. And the reckoning wasn't over. The courthouse in downtown Maplewood stood quiet under a washed-out September sky. Nearly a month had passed since Claire Miller had been found alive and Dean had been cleared of any suspicion. In that time, the town had witnessed a slow unraveling of secrets that had stretched back more than a decade, exposing corporate corruption, a family betrayal, and the weaponization of grief. But even as legal teams prepared for the upcoming federal hearings against Alan McCoy, and as Tyler McCoy sat in juvenile detention awaiting psychiatric evaluation, the more delicate work began, not with lawyers or judges, but between a mother and her son. Dean sat on the back porch of their house, the wooden planks beneath his feet still faintly stained from the luminol sweep. The garage had been cleared, the suitcase gone, and the house was no longer considered a crime scene. But it didn't feel the same. It felt like a place interrupted. Claire joined him in silence. She moved slowly, still healing from the bruises and the weight of hiding. She carried 2 mugs of tea and handed one to him without a word. Dean accepted it, then stared into the steam. "You're really here," he said, voice low. Claire sat beside him. "I am." They let the silence stretch. For once, it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like something necessary. "I thought I'd never see you again," Dean said finally. "And the last thing I said to you, on my birthday, was that I wanted you gone." Claire looked at him. "You were hurt. You didn't mean it." "I did," he replied. "In that moment, I did. I was angry. I thought you were the reason everything felt broken." She nodded, slowly. "Maybe I was. Not in the way you thought, but I wasn't honest with you. I should have told you about your father. About what I suspected. About the danger." He turned to her. "Why didn't you?" "I was trying to protect you," she said. "But I see now that I was also trying to protect myself, from the truth, from the fallout. From seeing how it might break you." Dean didn't speak right away. Then he said, "I'm not broken." Claire smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. "No. You're not." They sat in the quiet, watching the trees move in the early autumn wind. Eventually, Dean asked, "Do you think he'll be found?" "Alan," she said. "I think he'll surface. Men like that don't vanish forever. They always leave damage in their wake." "And Tyler?" Claire hesitated. "He was a victim, too. Not innocent, but twisted by someone who should have protected him. I don't forgive what he did. But I understand what drove him." Dean looked away. "I used to think he was my brother. That kind of friend." "He was," Claire said. "Until someone convinced him that loyalty was weakness." They fell quiet again. Later that week, Claire agreed to a televised interview, her first and only. Not for fame, not for exposure, but because she knew the story needed to be told publicly. Not just the part about the fraud, or the attempt to frame her son, but the part about the system that had failed more than one family. Sitting across from the interviewer in a modest studio, Claire recounted the full story, her husband's unintended involvement in a fraudulent network, her growing suspicions after his death, the documents she had discovered, the threats that began subtly and grew into shadows that followed her everywhere. And finally, the decision to run. "He was 17, she said. And I thought I was doing the right thing by vanishing. I didn't realize until I was hiding in that motel how much damage I'd done by not trusting him." The interviewer asked her what had changed since she returned. Claire glanced at the camera. "We talk now." We talk about the hard things. At home, Dean watched the interview alone. He didn't flinch when she talked about the mistakes. He didn't turn the channel when the footage of him being placed in cuffs replayed on screen. He just sat with it, letting the truth live alongside the pain. The days passed, then weeks. The house slowly began to feel lived in again. Claire took up her old job part-time. Dean returned to school under the cautious gaze of classmates who didn't quite know how to treat someone who'd been at the center of a near tragedy. Some avoided him. Others watched him like a character from a movie. He ignored them all. At home, though, the silence had shifted. They began cooking together. Short conversations turned into long ones. Questions once buried found their voice. Dean asked about his father. Claire told the truth. Dean shared dreams he had locked away. Claire listened. One night, after dinner, Dean pulled a wrapped box from under the couch. "What's this?" Claire asked. "I was going to give it to you when you came home," he said. "But it didn't feel right. Now it does." She opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photo, one from years ago. Dean was maybe 8. Claire was laughing, her arm around him, both of them covered in paint from a project gone sideways. "I found it in the attic," he said. "Figured we could put it back on the wall." Claire felt her throat tighten. "You remember that day?" He nodded. "It was the first time we ruined something together." And still smiled about it. They hung the photo that night, back on the living room wall where it had once lived. The house wasn't the same. Neither were they. But that was okay. Because rebuilding didn't mean recreating what had been lost. It meant shaping something stronger from the cracks. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't doing it alone.